Here on the TD Ameritrade Network. Let's continue our discussion about earnings. Let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment. And that's going to be Andy Swan, the co-founder at LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Andy.
Thank you for having me.
All right before lunchtime, we're talking burritos, tacos, that queso. I still don't know if that queso's worked out yet, but Chipotle just off all-time highs. What kind of data do you guys have out of LikeFolio to support the move?
Yeah, it's very different than a few years ago when I was on this show with you guys complaining that they couldn't figure out queso. I think they figured a lot of things out. Chipotle really growing by leaps and bounds. You can see it in its stock price over the last few years. At LikeFolio, we see consumer demand levels for Chipotle increasing 23% year over year. It's really kind of an interesting cyclical type of business in terms of, this is one of those periods where people are starting to get back into the stores, but it is up 23% year over year, kind of drawing that out for you in terms of number of people talking about going into Chipotle, buying Chipotle online or having it delivered, all those types of things that suggest they're setting up for a pretty good quarter as expected. I think revenues are expected to be up 14%. We actually see it coming in a little bit higher than that. Overall, I think Chipotle is doing a very good job with its current footprint of stores. But the most exciting thing, and I think what investors will be most interested in on this conference call, is their international expansion plans. They just signed a big deal to move into the Middle East with a very large footprint. I think, this is one of those companies that has figured out the model very, very well in North America and otherwise, and can expand, and could possibly even double its total number of stores without saturating any markets. And so I think that's very exciting for investors, as a company seems to have things a lot more figured out than they did a few years ago.
Yeah, Andy, there are so many things to go through. Even though this stock is sitting up close to its all-time high, there's a lot of things. Like, case in point, there's currently about 3,200 stores. They want to go to 7,000 stores, and they're going to open 255 this year. This deal that brings them into Kuwait and Dubai, that's going to increase their gross margins because they're not going to own them. It's going to be more of a franchise deal. So that's better for them. Then you look at the valuation, and even though the stock is at its all-time high, the current valuation, the current PE is about 56. That seems a little pricey, except the 5-year average is 80. So, this stock looks attractive. Even though it's sitting up at these levels, it's still giving you a lot of green lights for attractiveness.
Yeah, it really is. It's just a company that's just executing at a really high level. And I'm always amazed when I hear about companies opening essentially a new store every day for a year. That's just amazing and very difficult for me to kind of wrap my mind around, especially when you're talking about doing so internationally. That has to be an enormous task, and it looks like they're really pulling it off. When you walk into a Chipotle now, I'll tell you just anecdotally, and what we see from LikeFolio data is people aren't talking about, the sloppiness of the store. They're not talking about whether the burritos made them sick. They're talking about the fresh menu items. They're talking about this new chicken dish that they have. The only thing that's kind of been a bump in the road, you can see on the happiness, the consumer happiness graph that we have for Chipotle here, a big downtick here in the last couple of weeks. Well, really, that's all because apparently a store manager in Florida was seducing some of the customers' husbands, and that went viral. And so that became a big knock against Chipotle. But that's a much better problem, an isolated, incident in one store than, things going badly across the board. And that'll get cleaned up in the data shortly. But kind of a fun anecdote that's the only negative thing that's really come out about Chipotle in over a year.
Yeah, that's surprising. But at the same time, Andy, the more that they relied on delivery, I think that's a big thing. I won't get Chipotle delivered anymore just because it's not as good as when you go into the store.
No, you've got to get it warm.
Yeah.
It's got to be hot still.
Right.
Yes, I agree with that completely.
So, Andy, with the stock at or near all-time highs here, you guys got some positive data besides that, maybe that little blip on happiness. What kind of score do you have going into this one? Because, you know, we've seen stocks that have at or near all-time highs. It kind of falters sometimes, even though pretty decent report.
Yeah, you know, officially we're neutral on this. I think one of the ways to play this may be take a little bit of a shot that if it does get into new high territory, it could really break out. I think if you did that in a risk-defined way, that's a smart play. I certainly wouldn't be betting against the stock. I'm not sure I would just want to own shares here because, like you said, it's pretty high relative to range, but it has consolidated for a little while, and if it does get that move higher, I think it could be fairly significant.
All right, neutral on this. Great stuff, as always, Andy. Great data. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's Andy Swan, co-founder at LikeFolio, breaking down the data for us on Chipotle. You know what, Kevin, we always talk about scale with brand names. They're not even close to being at scale yet, but they're going to be eventually because the model works at this point. We got that other one that just came out, IPO'd, Cava. Yeah. It's a Mediterranean. I just don't see it. Everybody says, oh, it's going to be the next Chipotle. I go, I don't know about that.
You know this as well as I do with children in that age range. If affluent youth love Chipotle.
My son, college kid.
My kids live at Chipotle.
Yeah.
And so I don't always eat there, but it seems like I buy a lot of Chipotle in my life. But anyway, like I said, I think the growth prospects here, what they're doing with franchises, Brian Niccol he does an amazing job. And so I know I can see the chart. I know it's near an all-time high, but the story is just too good. Unless they